Wake up.
Oh boy, it's E3 time. Oh boy, I'm so excited. I'm so excited. Oh.
Life is pain!
Well, I guess I'll just overhype ideas for the games I want in my head and then get disappointed that the devs didn't add the exact same thing I wanted a month before the release date, assuming there even is an announcement for the games I want in E3. Kill me. Now, one thing that's on everyone's mind is what to do with the current weapon breaking system. Now, we all feel different levels of emotion in this mechanic, but I think everyone has at least felt some level of annoyance towards it. Now, we can't just throw it away, because the reason they implemented it in the first place was because if they didn't have it, you just find one good weapon and then just spam it throughout the entire story, leaving you never to experiment with anything else, which is not what they want you to do. They want you to experiment with all these unique mechanics they've given you, and you can't do that when you just spam the same weapon over and over and over again. But at the same time, it's annoying when I'm constantly thinking in the back of my head when I'm ripping through enemies, I'm like, man, this is a great weapon. I can't wait until it breaks. So this is where we need a good crafting and repair system. This system helps solve the problem where I'm constantly worrying about the durability of my stuff because I'm fighting or exploring, and I know that I'm gathering resources to either have the choice to get that weapon back later after I break it, or get an even better weapon. This would also solve the issue of stockpiling on items. You know that issue where you have so many items that you just collected and now you have like 300 bokoblin parts that you can't even do much with besides sell them for rupees or make elixirs. And then you just get to the point where it's all so inflated to the point of worthlessness. With a good crafting and repair system, we can create a system where you're constantly using and expending resources while still getting rewarded. However, a system I do think should be removed, or at least heavily nerfed, is armor upgrading. I think armor is holding back Breath of the Wild's combat. Anyone who's reached the late game should know that once you have fully upgraded armor, you're basically untouchable. Even Lionels can't do anything to you when you have fully upgraded armor. Breath of the Wild's combat isn't fun when you're just using your OP defense to take all the damage. It's best when you're using your offense as your defense. Stuff like flurry rushes, arrow headshots, parries. Your combative skills are what open up your enemies to even more attacks. So in response, I think we should focus on upgrading your offensive capabilities rather than your defensive capabilities. And I'm not talking about just like a basic thing like, oh, your attack stat goes from like 10 to 11. That's boring. I'm talking about stuff like new sword techniques, or at least stuff that adds perks like, I don't know, increasing your slam attack, like the radius of it, or allowing the Master Sword beam to go even without full health. Stuff like that. Just get creative with it, not just a number going from 0 to 1. However, with this new emphasis on offensive capabilities, it's clear we need weapons to facilitate them. A new weapon type would be cool, but I want weapons with more unique mechanics, like rods, the Korok leaf, the spring hammer, boomerangs. Give us weapons that really switch up how we approach melee fights. But I think we can really open up new avenues for combat in the runes. The thing that needs the most attention out of the existing runes is definitely Cryonosis. How you say Cryonis? Cryonesis? I don't know. I'll just say however the hell I want. So I'm gonna switch up pronunciations like probably whenever I feel like it. Cryonis is pretty much just the answer to the game's awful swing system. It has some cool puzzle moments, but when I think you're just exploring the world, it's easily the most useless and least versatile of the runes. I think the best way to turn Cryosis into a more versatile tool is to just increase the types of terrain you can manipulate. So instead of freezing water into pillars, maybe you can make pillars out of different types of terrain, who knows? And it doesn't even have to be pillars, actually. You can make pitfalls, maybe, so in this way, you could control the vertical placement in a fight, giving you brief openings where you have the high or low ground, which in turn gives the player different methods to approach fights. Magnesis is already a pretty great rune, but if you give it a more enhanced version, where you could actually manipulate the iron in an enemy's blood to move them like a metal object, I think that'd be pretty cool. Now, be careful with this, because we need to put some sort of limit for this, because if handled poorly, this could be way too OP. Like, put a meter on, like the stamina or something, just do something like that, and maybe limit the enemy types you can use it on. Like, heavier enemies like moblins couldn't be manipulated, Sheikah tech, stuff like that couldn't be manipulated because it's not iron, bosses are also immune, that kind of stuff, you know? Also, can we just increase the speed at, how fast you float around with Magnesis, because I mean, I feel like that opened up a lot of areas for slapstick comedy, I'm just saying. I mean, maybe too overpowered, but come on, just give me some. Stasis is probably the best rune in the entire game. It's super versatile, has a good skill ceiling, yet has many direct applications in moment-to-moment gameplay. But let me give you 2 words. Time stop. Is it really needed? Nah. Would it be unbalanced? Probably. But do I want to just make a bunch of tasteless JoJo memes and that'll become overused the week the game comes out? Yes. I don't care if it's stupid. I like JoJo. If you keep complaining, I'm not gonna release a part 2 review, alright? I'm holding the development team for Breath of the Wild 2 hostage until this feature gets added. I love you. I had to sit a while to think of a new upgrade for bombs, and the only thing I could think of would be bringing back bomb chews from the older games. And I mean, you can do some pretty cool puzzles with them. They can climb up walls and have a lot of practicality in combat, so yeah, bring back bomb chews. And then there's the camera room. This one's simple, just give us filters. It's a simple thing, but even as a kid, I loved taking photos in any game. I remember taking so many photos in Poke Park 2, dude. By the way, streaming that on Twitch, come on, over. I took a crap ton with Odyssey, and I played around with the filters so much in that game, and people clearly loved it in the new Spider-Man games, like taking photos around New York City, so come on. People love taking photos of Breath of the Wild. The world's already so beautiful as it is, just give it some filters to play around with. Also, little thing I was wondering about, I was wondering if we should remove the Korok leaf and instead have a wind rune in the Sheikah Slate, but I'll leave that up to you guys. You guys can tell me that down in the comments below. I really don't know where to take that, but if you guys could tell me, that'd be great. But with all these new abilities, we need new enemies to use them on. Now, for the most part, Breath of the Wild just had you fighting Bokoblins, Moblins, and Lizafol. Again, I'm sorry, I'm bad. This is like Cryosis 2. How do you pronounce this? Lizafos. Lizards. There, I'll say that. Yeah, there'd be other enemies, sometimes like Keese, Choo-Choos, Wizrobes, but they're pretty easy to get rid of, and they're more like support enemies than anything. I think a good way to make the player experience a more varied combat experience would just be to have more unique combinations, like have the Wizrobes and the Choo-Choos like interact with the main 3 enemy types more. Even having like a weak enemy like an Octorok in the distance shooting rocks from you while you're fighting like Bokoblins and Moblins adds a whole new dimension to a fight. But having existing enemies work together can only accomplish so much. If we're looking for a 4th main enemy type, I think Wolfos are a great place to start. With Moblins focusing more on their tankiness, Lizards focusing on the speed, and Bokoblins becoming more of the workhorse enemy, I think Wolfos and their shield-centric fighting style could lend well to adding a new hurdle for the player to work around. This would make attacks that cover an area, such as Link's Slam, not something that would completely stun the entire group. So while everyone else is down, a Wolfos could still be ready and up to fight you. Darknauts would also be a really great mini-boss to make a return, and as for more supporting enemies, there's just too many on the list, dude. I think you can go back and add so many enemy types. I'll pop them up on screen, but it's crazy how many of these guys did not make it into the first game. There's so many, actually, that you could put into the second one. But all the stuff I've talked about mostly focuses on combat. There's another part where we're just exploring the world. So it's time we focus on the movement mechanics. Now, I may be biased because 2 of my favorite games of all time emphasize fun movement, but in any game, if you make the simple act of getting a character from point A to point B fun, you're pretty much an 8 out of 10 game by default in my book. So the first thing we need to do is make horses more usable. They're cool to ride on, but the moment you reach something like a cliff, that horse pretty much just becomes abandoned and you're gonna be back on foot. Now, they did remedy this by adding this DLC horse armor that teleports your horse when you call it, so just add that in the base game and we should be good. Another thing they need to fix is swimming. It's awful. The movement speed is pitiful, you have no attacking options once you get into the water, and you can't even swim underwater to find stuff. I guess you can make rafts more common near rivers and such, or maybe even have more complex boats in general, so now oceans and rivers aren't just blue masses of nothing that you just want to keep away from at all costs. And just add cool stuff to them. Maybe have like Zora live down in the oceans and you can like find their settlements. It's just get more creative. Make the oceans a place I actually want to explore. And then there's climbing, which, don't get me wrong, was a great addition, but not without its problems. It isn't fun just to hold up the control stick for a minute, just to get up a tall mountain. The freedom climbing gives you is amazing, but the process itself is just boring. So I think a way to solve this is to reintroduce the hook shot from the older games. You'd aim it, and then you'd grapple to the top of the cliff, but it would take up your stamina faster than climbing. Also, remove rain. It's horrible. Please, for the love of God, it adds nothing. It's not fun to have your core movement mechanic that you use like almost all the time just be basically taken away from you. It's not fun. Just no, done. No. Bye. Shield surfing was fun, but the fact it took up your shield's durability made it less appealing for many, so just get rid of that as well. Just let it not affect your shield's durability. Just don't do that. Also, this is a very vague idea I've thought about, but how we add more air traversal, you know? Like, bring back those bird things from Skyward Sword. Maybe add some stuff, that's floating in the sky, like islands, to give more incentive to use flight. Again, it's a very vague idea. I'm just kind of taking stuff from Skyward Sword at this point, but, just a thing to think about. But at the end of the day, while I think many of these changes I've suggested are great and would overall improve the gameplay, these are just improvements and fixes. How do we make Breath of the Wild 2 truly a great game that can match up to the legacy of the first one? The answer is we go in the opposite direction. I don't think we can ever make anything that can recreate the feeling of wonder, excitement, and immersion that I had playing the first game. Not just because of the gameplay, but just because of a lot of the external factors as well. Like, this was my first console launch. This was my first Zelda game. It was a redefining game for the franchise. It was just a huge event for open world games in general, for the whole industry as a whole. You can still look at it as like a huge leap for us. It's just a monumental game that I don't think you can, just redo and recreate those feelings that came with that. So instead, we shouldn't try focusing on recreating on what's been done already, but instead focus on what Breath of the Wild chose to ignore. In the first game, Link was a lone character in a huge world. Yes, there are brief places where civilization was established, but they were all disconnected with very few people in them. It was a beautiful way to capture the nature of the wild that had spread after Ganon's 100-year reign. So instead of making Link this lone adventurer like in the first game, though, we should take a step back and focus on being the hero again to help people. So instead of having this feeling of isolation, let's take the opposite approach and make the world feel more alive than ever. Since we beat Ganon in the first game, I think there should be a massive resurgence of sorts, like with previously more empty lands being filled with homes and people, and to make the world feel more alive. Now, I don't think these homes should spring out of nowhere. That wouldn't make any sense. So this is where an idea comes in. What if we have Link actually help rebuild the infrastructure, like rebuild the towns and such like that? We had a side quest like that, right? I can't remember the name off my head, but that side quest was so amazing because it gave me something that I had in the older games like Skyward Sword and Majora's Mask. Just helping people out and actually feeling like a hero to the people and not just a lone adventurer is something I missed in the first game, and we should try to focus on that again in the second game. But yeah, you could gather resources to rebuild cities and expand existing ones. I'll explain what reward I'm thinking of for building these structures would be, but for now, stick with me. Also, this will give you, again, more uses for that ever-growing backpack of resources you have, right? Which again goes back to that system of giving and getting resources. We're trying to aim for that. We don't want to stockpile items and just, have them be inflated and have no purpose later on, right? We want to have a system where we're constantly giving and getting resources. That's the system we want to create. I think a great way to make the world feel like it's truly progressing would be to incorporate that old Shiga technology into these new settlements. Who knows, maybe you can even have like a full cyberpunk theme with it, with less glitches, but still. Giving the player the idea that Hyrule is like going through this own industrial revolution, you know what I mean? And once you've built these new areas, new characters and people can inhabit them, and now you have a new safe haven from the danger of the outside world, with new shops that can sell more useful items. And that's the main goal I have with this mechanic, to make it feel like you are a part of the world. You're taking back the world that Ganon ruined from you in the first game. And in these towns, you could also have characters that offer you side quests. This is another thing that the second game needs to focus on that the first game chose to leave: character-centric side quests. While there were great characters in Breath of the Wild, most of the side quests were essentially just fetch quests. There were no real impactful moments like in the other Zeldas. And again, I think this return to emphasis on side characters is what Breath of the Wild 2 needs. The first game was all about making you feel isolated in this world when barely anyone was around anymore. So the second game needs to make the world feel more alive with these NPCs that actually interact with you and give you meaningful quests. Another way to make the world feel more alive is interaction between different towns. Don't make characters just bound to one area. Make it so they actually travel around to other towns. If we're under the idea that Hyrule is going through this grand resurgence, showcasing what once used to be a world full of isolated cities is now turning into an interconnected society is a great way to illustrate this idea. The best way to make this game feel more alive than the first one is to have more character interactions, or maybe even certain characters follow you when you're exploring the world. Now, if we were to do this, they'd have to be careful on paper. On paper. I love the idea of Zelda being playable or having the champions as followers, but then you reach the issue of having to take care of an AI and you could risk making the game feel like a crappy escort mission. Maybe you can make Zelda accessible as like a second player. That's a whole other can of worms dealing with split screen and Nintendo's online. That's terrible. It's terrible online. I should probably make a video on like why Nintendo's online is like a whole disgusting thing. I should make a whole video about like Nintendo's terrible practices in general, but that's a whole different can of worms. It's a can of worms inside of a can of worms, actually. That's a whole, like, okay, whatever, you know, back to focusing. Okay, now this is my favorite idea. So take Breath of the Wild, right? Take Breath of the Wild, but then make it World War III. Thank you. Thank you. I'll be here all night. Thank you. Give me your money. Thank you so much. I love you all. Suck my dick, please. Suck my dick. Okay, but for real, imagine Ganon's forces, or the Yiga clan or whatever, are still trying to take over Hyrule, right? But Link has been building up all these new towns all around the world, so it's like a war for land kind of mechanic, right? Maybe even have wars between the normally peaceful nations like the Rito or the Zora, with Link being like the Avatar trying to bring balance to them, right? Maybe even have a system where Link has certain favorability from different nations. Maybe Ganon's forces could try to take over existing towns and have you fight them off. I just realized something. I am essentially saying that we should introduce race wars into Breath of the Wild. You know what? Yeah, you know what? Sure, race wars are fun. Maybe the cities from each faction have their own soldiers, and the soldiers on your side can aid you in large battles. I like the idea of Link being pitted against like the other races, because from a gameplay standpoint, I think there's a lot of different ways that, you know, it can offer a lot of different diversity. Like fighting a Goron and a Zora, that's like a completely different, you know, enemy type, right? But this war idea is something I'm really excited of thinking about, because it fits so well with this idea that we're not just exploring the wild, we are taming it as we go along. Okay, and the last thing I want to talk about before I end this discussion is have an actual ending in post-game. Let me set a stage for you, right? Imagine playing Breath of the Wild for your entire summer in India, while, like, pretty much the main thing you were doing that entire few months was just playing this game. You beat the final boss and you're like, yeah, I did it, I saved Hyrule, and then imagine the sheer disappointment you'd feel when the credits end and it spawns you right back to the point before you beat Ganon. This is the definition of a letdown. Putting me right back to the point before I fight Ganon is like, oh, okay, so all that was for nothing, because I could never really kill Ganon, so I guess Hyrule's just screwed. I know from a story perspective you beat Ganon, but there should be a change in gameplay too. You can't just achieve the main goal of the game, and the game just pretends like nothing happened. It's just, oh my god, just add a post-game. I hate it when games do this. It feels like it invalidates all your progress and all that time you put in the game. Okay. Besides that, I don't know, bring back dungeons with unique themes, and seriously, remove rain. No, it's not. It's bad. It's really bad. I hate it. No one likes rain. Alright, and I'm just gonna sit around here until E3 comes. See you guys, I guess. You can go now. Wah! Not now, man. I'm waiting for E3. Like, can't you just... you've already, like, attacked me, what, 2 times? This channel's been only, like, what, 5 months old, and you've already, like, broken in my room multiple times. Can you leave? Didn't you hear me, dude? I said leave.
Would you please sign my petition?
Well, it looks like we finally found something that we can agree on.